I'm Lisa Krauser, and I'd like to welcome you all to Greyhound Options Learn and Greet. Today's event is called iHound Imagery, taking iconic pictures of your Greyhound with the camera you always have on hand. Greyhound Options is really happy to be able to put on these events free of charge. But we just want people to know that if you're looking to support Greyhound Options and our missions or activities, we're happy to accept donations, and you can certainly do that right on our website, which is www.greyhoundoptions.org. We've recently, one of our board members has done a lot of work upgrading our website. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it lately, you might want to take a quick peek. I would now like to introduce our speaker, Sharona Jacobs. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. And then I think we're all really excited to learn how to take amazing pictures of our Greyhounds. So with that said, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm hoping everyone is seeing on their screen right now my model for today. This is Ori, and I again thank you so much for having me. So without further ado, a little bit of introduction. My day job is I photograph authors for their books, their jackets, any magazine and interview articles that they do. I do imagery for their publicity and promotional material. I'll show you a couple examples, but to be honest, I know you're really here for the dog pictures, so we'll go through this very quickly. So photograph authors and professors. This is Vincent Brown, who's a professor of American history and African American studies at Harvard. He's also producer of a PBS series, Independent Lens. This is a New York Times best-selling author, Steve Almond. He's host of the New York Times Dear Sugars podcast with Cheryl Strayed. This is author, actor, and artist, Anthony James. He used to specialize in playing villains in film. He was in many, many Westerns, including Unforgiven by Clint Eastwood. His autobiography, which is how I got to know him, was called Acting My Face, and it was published in 2014. We're getting closer to dogs here, but this is Rita Zoe Chin. She's the author of the memoir, Let the Tornado Come. This is her horse, Claret. And we're getting a lot closer to greyhounds here. This is Anita Diamond, who's the author of 5 novels. She's best known for her 1997 novel, The Red Tent, which became a huge bestseller and a book club favorite. On the left, you'll see Ori. And Anita actually asked, she'd seen on social media that I had gotten a greyhound recently. And so this was Ori just after we adopted him. But speaking of Ori, I figured if I get a bio page, so does he. This is a little bit of background about my partner in the presentation. And he has been on my personal social feed for quite a while. Every once in a while, he'll pop up in my professional feed as my lighting assistant. But he's become very popular for the silly photos of he and his fuzzy black cat sibling, Boomy. You'll see more of those pictures later on. And boop. So a little bit of background about what we're going to be talking about today. Basic background we've gone through. I'm going to teach you really about learning how to see, which is how we're going to bring in the composition, posing and positioning, working with what you've got, and that means both with the personality of the greyhound and the backgrounds that you are working with, the weather, seasonality. I'm going to talk to you a lot about light, and then how to best capture your hound's personality in your relationship. So first of all, the goal of this presentation is not to create perfection or something that you need to hang in an art gallery, but really to create images that you love. I am going to be going over tips and ways to think visually, but please know that you are definitely the final judge of what makes a photograph of your hound absolutely wonderful. even and perhaps even especially if it doesn't follow all these visual rules that I'll be laying out, because the phrase "rules are meant to be broken" is there for a reason. So let's move on. So one of the things I wanted to lay out ahead is the fact that the phone does not see the world, or your camera does not see the world the way you do. We all have the benefit of a brain, and we interpret how we see images and perspective, whereas the phone doesn't. The phone or the camera, whatever's closest is biggest. And you will learn all these ways to actually take advantage of the way the phone or the camera works to see the world, to show the world the way you see it. So we're going to be getting a little bit more intentional about how we use the camera on your phone. It doesn't mean I'm going to be technical, because everything that I'm going to be going over today, you can use. You do not need to know anything about cameras in order to learn how to take more visually interesting images. What you will learn is, different tips and techniques that anyone can use to use your camera better as a tool. So almost all of the pictures that you're going to see going forward were taken with just my iPhone using available light. I will note the few exceptions where I'm not, so you can sort of see the difference with using a professional camera, or maybe I have one image using professional lights, but even there, I'm using lights the way you can use window light, or anyone can use window light or available light. The most technical thing I'll ask you to know is just how to turn on portrait mode within your iPhone, which should just be an option when you're in your camera app, to zoom in or zoom out, which mirrors what a wide angle lens is, which is a lens that will let in more of the picture, or a telephoto lens, which allows you to zoom in. And those are all, again, things that you can use in your photo app. Maybe once or twice I'll show black and white conversions. Again, that's something you can do right in your camera app. So those are the most technical things I'll really expect you to know going forward. This really is for anyone. The first thing we're going to talk about is photo composition. So what is it? It is how photo composition is how a photographer arranges visual elements within the frame of their camera or their camera phone. It can be made up of just a few elements. It can be made up of many different elements. It's really how you as the photographer puts those things together within your camera frame that helps a photograph become more or less interesting to a viewer, and how the photographer can put his or her spin on a photograph. It's really how you as an iPhone artist can tell the story within the confines of a single frame. Just a tiny bit of history. Composition has been used by painters for hundreds of years. Many of our current composition tools will come from the art world. Master painters worked out how people look at a painting, put together these systems that would cause people to stare deeply into the paintings. They're going to use many of the same techniques, or they did, that I'm going to be talking about today, including using leading lines, curves, pattern repetition, and other techniques. And also, very importantly, all of these things, these different compositional techniques, will help you take advantage of turning a two-dimensional image into something that conveys 3 dimensions. So, and that was used in paintings as well, because the canvas is a 2-dimensional surface, but it's the art of painting that created that 3 dimensions. And you're going to be doing similar things with your camera, with your phone. All right, so let's dive in there into our compositional tools. So forgive me, there's just a couple images that are not Greyhounds, but they're really, really useful images. This one was taken by Eileen Blass, and I love it because it shows so beautifully this compositional technique called rule of thirds. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I'll go through it as we look through these next images. So the rule of thirds is a rule of thumb for composing visual images. An image can be imagined as divided into 9 equal parts, as you see here. Intersected by 2 equally spaced horizontal lines and 2 equally spaced vertical lines. And the really important compositional elements, the things that you really want people to look at, you're going to place them along those lines or intersecting those lines. So why do we do this? Because aligning a subject with these points creates more energy, more tension, more interest in a composition than just slapping your subject right in the middle. And again, this doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to align perfectly along those lines, but if you get close, it will have that great, interesting effect. And you'll see a lot of this tip in these images going forward. Also, probably this is a good time to let you know going forward, as we go through these tips, you're going to see them layered a lot in each image. So you won't see me just using one tip. You will at the beginning, but as we go on, you're going to see me layering these different tips at the same time. And you'll even be able to, just starting from the beginning, you'll start to see these patterns yourself. So again, rule of thirds works for square images as well as the horizontal or vertical rectangles. And you can see here, I'm using this image because it aligns. It's not absolutely perfect, but I'm aligning his nose, which is probably the first thing you're seeing in the image, and then his ears along those lines. And I even have that decking behind him, which happens to have sort of a grid-like background, aligning pretty closely as well. Here you see the rule of thirds tip being used without those lines. And you can see how Ori is really aligned with that bottom third. So next compositional technique, frame within a frame. And of course, Ori had to add his little special touch to this one. So a frame within a frame is a photography composition technique that basically within the four-sided frame of the photograph itself, another frame will enhance the subject of your composition. It can be an actual frame like a window frame, it can be a mirror, but here obviously a door makes a great and interesting frame. And in the next couple images, you'll see other ways to frame your doggo. So here we see that the vertical parts of the porch help frame Ori. And this also takes advantage of using different kinds of available light, which we'll talk about soon, and using vivid color. And here we have another frame within the frame, which is a store window. And we're capturing another kind of existing light, the existing light of street lamps, which is highlighting his face. And you also see those fluorescent lights in the store. And I'm going to note a little thing, it's not part of my tips, but if you see Ori's face and you see that little catch light in his eye, that little reflection of light in his eye, that's always a great thing to determine if you're getting enough light in your dog's eyes, if you see that little pinprick of bright light. So here we have a nice good yawn. The frame within a frame doesn't even need to be a vertical or linear frame. Here he's being framed within the outline of the trees and the outline of the stones. So he is placed in the middle and I'm using the landscape to frame him. Moving on to repetition. So I would say that repetition is to photography composition what rhythm is to song or to lyrics. A repetition of an item, a color, or an element creates a pattern. And obviously patterns draw the eye into a photograph. So here I took advantage of a lot of Ori's dog walking groups of similarly colored and sized hounds on the right, and on the left, we did the small, medium, and large, but also similar shaped animals, similar color, just differences in size. Someone jokingly referred to that as when Ori and his versions got stuck in the dryer too long and shrunk and shrunk. Going in the opposite direction. Here we go. It can be repetition of a particular body part. So there's nothing like a bunch of hound butts right there. It can be repetition of all the hounds at a different level. Here we also have the pop of color from the leashes, and the leashes are acting like a leading line, which we'll talk more about soon. It can be a repetition of pattern as well. Speaking of leading lines, so leading lines can be either straight or curved. They're visual elements that really pull the viewer's eye towards a subject or a focal point. They can be anything. They can be roads running off into the distance. Here we have a walking path. Could be an arm stretched out towards the subject. It could be tree branches rising towards the moon if that was your subject. But basically anything that pulls attention towards something that you want people to notice. These lines help give the flat surfaces, so it's a flat image, a flat photograph, the appearance of depth, dimension, and shape. So it's creating that illusion of depth, which we'll be talking over and over about. So here we have a C curve, a leading line of the dog pool that's bringing you into Ori's expression. And even the shape of Ori's head and neck is another C shape. Here the leash as a corkscrew leading line that leads you right to my waterlogged dog. And the great thing about greyhounds is that they themselves can be leading lines because they're so long. I love this sort of S-shaped curve of his body here, even though he's making the most ridiculous sit I've ever seen. But the great thing is you can follow his vertebrae, you can follow his backbone to the tip of his nose, and it leads you right into that photograph. So the next compositional tool is a reflection. Reflection always adds a little bit of an interesting visual element. I chose these two images side by side because it's going to illustrate a point that I'm making now and a point I'm going to be making in a second. So these two images look pretty similar. It's Ori in front of a reflective pond. But on the left, you see a frame within a frame. You see the reflection framing Ori's face. And on the right side, you see his ears intersecting or overlapping part of the reflection. So I'm being really nitpicky here, but I think that of those two images, the composition on the left works a little bit bigger because I'm not having anything distracting with the top of his head or anything coming out of the top of his head. And that frame within a frame technique is being used as well as the reflection technique. Reflection can also be something that you don't actually see the hound themselves. Here we have the reflection of shadow in that actual same pond itself. And this is just a note, you can create a great dog picture and not actually have the dog in the photo at all. So this is one of my favorite words in the whole world, juxtaposition, which is a fancy schmancy word that just basically means combining two elements in the same picture, but highlighting the interesting contrast between them. And the point of that is to create an eye-catching and thought-provoking image. And it can also create a really humorous image as well. Basic examples of juxtaposition, which you can see here, say that 5 times fast, are the contrast between a big and small. It could be between old and young. It could be between light and dark, and black and white in color. So those are visual juxtapositions. There's also conceptual juxtapositions. Like, for instance, you'll often see in fashion magazines this really high-end fashion model in this fancy schmancy outfit, but they're on a desolate landscape or a windswept sort of, apocalyptic landscape. That's a juxtaposition, but more of a compositional as well as visual juxtaposition. Couple examples. So here we have big and small as well, but we also have the difference in color. So we have a large dark dog, small light dog. We also have a linear versus curved juxtaposition. If you look at Ori's clothing, we have those linear stripes, and the smaller dog, you have that sort of round and hand knitted look. So we have another form of juxtaposition there. So juxtaposition, I always say, is almost just expect the unexpected. What are these two things that you would put together, you would normally think together, but what do they create as a whole afterwards? So this one is just kind of like, why are you putting these two things together? But they work, and they work because they do share some things in common. Here I joke that Ori has a very sort of cartoon-like expression. So the painting on the sidewalk also works with him visually. They're both black, white, and red elements as well with his collar there. So the character brings it together, even though there's two subjects completely different. Here we have a little bit of that conceptual juxtaposition. So these two subjects both represent speed from different eras. They look very different, but you put them together, it tells you kind of a story. Moving on to another compositional element, using your foreground, your middle ground, and your background. So it's really important to use your foreground, middle ground, and background if you're trying to tell a story and you again want to add that sense of depth to the image. So the foreground element here, obviously the lighter colored dog, allows the viewer to enter the picture. Then it's leading to the second element, which is Ori, creating a relationship there. And then finally, you're going to go to the third background element. And here it's the expression of the two humans watching what's going on between the animals. But to have all these three elements work in harmony really helps improve a photograph, again, tell a story, and create a sense of depth and humor in this case. Another example of using that foreground, middle ground, and background, it's to ask you as the viewer, to ask you to be curious, what's going on in that image? So the first thing you're seeing is Ori with that expression on his face, kind of wondering what is going on. And then you're starting to understand through the middle ground, oh, that's what's going on. Huh, interesting. And then the background helps complete the story. Here, a lot of people sort of get the idea of that film, the birds, you know, it creates different visual elements to create a feeling and a story. And again, this was using a very old iPhone that I had several years back. So you don't have to have perfection in order to create an image that is visually arresting. Our foreground here tells also a sense of story. You see the ottoman in the foreground, gives you an idea of the person photographing the image. They're at a chair, they're interacting with this beheaded creature. And you're seeing his expression, you're seeing the hat, and then you're getting a sense of place with the background. Oh, it's winter, there's a fire, it's a sort of cozy library room. It helps tell a story and create visual depth. Our final compositional element is using depth of field. And here you're going to see shallow on the left, to the medium, to wide on the right. So what does this mean? Photography, as I said before, flattens 3 dimensions into 2 dimensions. In order to create that feeling of space and dimensionality, a photographer has to be aware of what's in a shot and how you're focusing on it. Focus and depth of field also adds to that illusion of a 3rd dimension, and the shallow depth of field, like on the left, can give the viewer the impression that they're focused on something immediately in front of them. They're only focused on that one thing. It provides, again, that depth, a sense of scale, even in this flat image. A wider depth of field, which you'll see on the right, shows everything in the same amount of detail. And that holds a place as well. That can help with our foreground, middle ground, background kind of image that we just saw before. But if you're looking to do a portrait where you're just focusing on your hound, a more shallow depth of field like you see on the left would work. And you can do all of this in your portrait mode in your iPhone or your camera phone. And for those who want more technical information about f-stops and all that good stuff, I'm happy to talk about that in individual questions. But for most people, this is the amount of information you need to know about depth of field. So moving on from composition to posing and positioning, I have our very own Matt Lyons here modeling for us on the left. And I wish I could give photo credit to the person who took that picture of Ori when he first came to Greyhound Options and Matt, but I don't actually know who took that image. So if you do, and you can let me know, I will give a shout out to them. But on the right is the image that Matt took of him. And I want you to notice where the camera is and the angle that Matt's using when you see this image of Ori on the right. As I said before, according to the camera, what's closest looks biggest, which is obviously Ori's fantastic nose. So look at this perspective of where Matt is shooting from. He's shooting slightly down, but close to eye level, which adds a little bit of drama when you're right at eye level. Okay, I get this question so much. How do I get my Greyhound to look at me? So illustrated on the left, the most obvious is food. Food is a great motivator. Ideally, you're working with a partner with this, but if you're doing this on your own, you're going to hold your food in one hand, you're going to have your camera in the other. But if you can work with a partner, these tips work even better. And I'll show an image afterwards that shows that. So food works wonderfully. Having a squeaky toy, anything that arouses their attention to get those ears up and alert. A light up toy, especially anything that flashes on and off, will get their attention. Any goofy noise that you have, if you have a special voice that you use with them, if you're a singer, like I am a goofy person and I sing to my Greyhound all the time, and God love him, he actually enjoys this. So if I sing to him, he'll look at me as well. All of those things are great ways to get them to look at you. What I also taught Ori as well is I used basic clicker training, which is training where you teach a hound to be rewarded with food after a click, and then you combine those with a command. So I taught Ori the command, look at me, and clicked, got food, and then I didn't need to use the clicker anymore. So I just do look at me, give him food, and then eventually just say, look at me, and he does it. Now, he is a Greyhound. He is not a Border Collie, so I will not say he is perfection at this all the time, but it definitely helps me probably about 80–85% of the time. The other thing that I really would want you to focus on is that you can take great images of Greyhounds without them looking at you. Having them look off at the distance or look at something else, you can still get really interesting, engaged images. So just notice where, and if you do want it to look like he's looking at you, but he's looking someplace else, just notice where he's looking and get in between you and that. So if you see your dog looking at another dog, get in between, provided it's safe and everyone's, happy dogs. But just take advantage and you be the person that moves to get the shot. Don't ever feel like you have to wait for the dog to get the perfect moment. Use your legs as your zoom, use yourself, get in there, and then you can pretend that the dog is looking at you, even if he or she is actually looking off in the distance or at something else. Another thing to note is that some dogs just really don't like it when they can't see your eyes. So if you have your face up in the iPhone or camera phone or camera, they might just not feel comfortable if they don't see your eyes. So some people will actually pre-focus. So they'll tap on their phone if they're using a phone on the dog's face and then move their head just slightly out of the way so you can still make eye contact and you can still engage with your dog and capture them looking at you. Okay, so this was an example of how working with a partner can work. I wish that branch wasn't right in the way, but we have a person on the right taking a photo and the person on the left showing some food. And so you get those great engaged alert expressions. Okay, so we talked about camera angle. I'm going to talk about camera angle a lot, actually, because where you place the camera has a huge effect on how the image looks. So the camera angle is where you place your camera in relation to your subject. That is the height, the distance, and the angle relative to your hound's face. Where you place the camera, as I said before, makes a huge difference for how your subject appears in the image. A really low camera angle, which is below their eye level or even below their chin level, can make a person, or in this case, a dog, look taller and seem more powerful. And actually, now that I tell you this, you might start seeing this in images a lot. I call this the hero shot. Did you ever notice when you look at images of powerful people like CEOs, or if you're looking at movie posters and you're seeing superheroes, they're all taken at a vantage point where the camera is below the person being photographed. And so now I challenge you, every time you see a movie poster or you see an image of like a C-level or CEO type of person, you're probably going to notice this. In this image, in order to create this effect, I squatted way low, very close to the ground, in order to take advantage of Ori's height, his length, his expression, and his gaze, which is just slightly off camera. And I believe in this image, if I'm remembering correctly, he probably was looking at another dog in the distance, which is how I got that expression. But a couple examples of those hero shots. So perfect example. The Marvel Avengers, if you look at every single person in this image, they're almost all shot with a lower camera angle. So the photographer is below them, giving that sense of power, of majesty. Even the people who are leaning over a little bit, they're still higher up than the person holding the camera. So that low camera angle is huge. And then I did a little Google search and I found this. And so, yes, our dogs can be superheroes as well. And this is thanks to crown and paw. So here we have an example of Ori and a full body hero shot where I'm taking advantage of the fact he's on a stairwell. He is higher up than I am. I'm squatting down on a lower landing. Soon you're going to be seeing hero shots everywhere, I promise you. And here I'm coming up a little bit higher than the first couple of shots. So he seems a little bit more relatable. I'm coming up to his eye level, but he still looks a little bit larger than life. So here we have two dogs. We have Sophie on the right and Ori on the left. And I want you to notice the angle of each dog in relation to the camera and see, do they give you a different feeling based on where their angle is? So Sophie on your right, she's a little bit more at eye level, maybe a little bit more relatable looking. And then Ori is back in that classic hero shot, looking off into the distance. Now we're coming down to eye level, and it has a very different effect on the viewer. And especially when the dog is laying down like you see here. So I would say that this angle really contributes to a sense of relaxation and the dreaminess of the shot, as well as I'm using a shallow depth of field to just focus on his eyes, and you'll see that bright catch light, that reflection in his eyes as well. And this one is a little bit of, I found it a little bit of a humorous riff of the classic glamour shot that you see of the pinups. Here we're right at eye level, or I call it the dog's eye view. So I really recommend getting at this level for a more interesting, engaged shot. This, just FYI, happens to be the vantage point that we professional photographers will often take human portraits and headshots as well. It's just a really flattering angle. It's very relatable. And this one was indeed taken with my professional camera. Here, you can take advantage of camera angle to create a humorous effect as well. I'm thinking here, what's closest to the camera is going to be biggest. This is the nose eye view. This is a great way to take advantage of the geometry of Greyhound and their goofy roaching qualities. But a little word to the wise, don't ever use this angle for a human. They won't talk to you the next day. Again, have fun playing with camera angle. Here I'm way below, way below. I am on a stairwell below him. And this one is exaggerated by using a bit of a wide angle or a fisheye effect. So if you go to your photo app and you see, a 1:1 is your normal camera width. And then if you do telephoto, it goes in. If you go wide angle, it comes out. So I use that wide angle, or it's listed as 0.5, 1, then 2x. And so the 2x is telephoto, the 1 is the regular ratio, and the 0.5 is that wide angle, which is what I used here because it exaggerates everything. It exaggerates it for effect. And I'm shooting here several steps below him, but most importantly, I'm keeping his face parallel to the camera in order to get his expression, because otherwise you just see his nostrils or maybe his chin. Okay, so remember I talked about things don't need to be perfect to create a great image. I would never say this is a perfect image. You see random stuff in a background, you see my little cat's butt and his tail, you see random Greyhound clothes, but because I love that humorous quality of his face, his pricked up ears, the sense of distortion, to me, it's a great image and successful. And again, you're going to define what's successful for your imagery. So I'm showing you this image as a little bit of a contrast. This is how we usually see our greyhounds, shooting slightly from above, from human eye level down to the dog. And it's usually less interesting just because we see it all the time. It's just very common. It's not bad. It's a fine photo, but it's just less interesting because we see it every single day. It's generally more interesting to see things from the dog's eye view than from ours. of course, there's always an exception to every rule. For here, I'm still looking down on him, but he's making really good eye contact. There's nothing more hilarious to me than a disgruntled wet dog after a walk. I think they're hilarious and photogenic. I love the reflection of the rain on his jacket. So to every rule, there's always going to be an exception, and you are going to be the judge of what makes that image really sing to you. Making the most of what you've got. So we've moved past composition, we've moved past posing and positioning, and now let's talk about using what you've got. And using what you've got here, we're going to start with cropping in. So look at this image on the right-hand side. That's my final image that I took on my iPhone when I was taking Ori for a walk one morning. But that wasn't the original image. The original image was this. It's not quite as interesting, right? There's too much going on. It's distracting. There's a bright white sky, which your eye goes right to because our eye tends to go to what's brightest. So what did I really want you to see? I wanted you to see the texture that that spool made in the background and the expression of Ori's eyes. So I cropped into that. And so I would really encourage you all to say to yourself, you know, I got this image and there's some really interesting things about it, but let's crop in, and you can do that in any photo app. Let's crop in to the part that I really want people to focus on, or to the part where I think is the most interesting. So cropping is huge. You can take a mediocre image and make it into something really strong. Here, similar situation. I'm cropping in and turning into a black and white conversion because the original image, there was something about it I liked. It was a messy room. I'm showing you in all of its messy glory to show what a distraction it is when you have a lot of busy things in the background, whether those busy things are texture or mess or different colors, just lots of distractions. But what I wanted to capture was the cute moment when my Ori puts his nose on my bed to say, hey, pay attention to me, or hey, it's time to go for a walk. I wanted to capture that because it's a moment that for me is very resonant, and it just is very representative of who he is and the relationship we have, and that I find that I want to capture and keep. So what did I do? I took an image. These were two images taken right before and after. And the only thing I did was I cropped in. So I got rid of most of the distraction, and then I turned a color image to a black and white. So you're just focusing on Ori's expression. And again, your eye goes to what's lightest and brightest. So that's going to take you to his face here instead of all the distractions in the background. So making the best use of what you've got. What do you do when you're taking your dog for a walk and the weather is not ideal? I'd say enjoy it. I actually think that beautiful weather is really boring. I'd say that most people tend to look for sunny days to photograph people and their dogs. And so you see it all the time. Been there, done that. But to be honest, sunny days, especially when it's harsh noon light, are like just not great for taking interesting portraits. So I really look for atmospheric weather. I look for fog. I look for light rain, not heavy because you don't want to destroy your phone or your camera. I look for snow. And in this case, I saw that somebody in an apartment building was doing their laundry and it was creating fog, which I found really interesting and atmospheric. So I thought, oh, that's going to create a really great feel. What can I do to make this even more interesting? So I looked for spots of light, which were created by the street lamps in front of this apartment building. And so I positioned Ori till he was right in front of one of those street lights, and I was getting that great catch light in the eye that is on the right side of his face. So basically, I had all these great elements I built together. I found this great atmospheric fog. I found the street lights to light his face. I have the leading line of his leash, and I'm even taking a bit of a hero shot here as well. You'll even see that rule of thirds coming into play in this image too. So again, layering compositional techniques and working with what you've got. Here I have another foggy day. It was raining. I loved it. I love the texture of rain on fur. I think it creates extra interest in an image. You can see the glossiness of the leaves showing you the weather. Snow. Well, if you're in New England, we've got lots of it. Take advantage of it. It creates great texture. Taking advantage of what we've got. Take advantage of the seasons, and think about what represents each season to you, and make sure to photograph your Greyhound with it. Another note is that a lot of organizations like our Greyhound Options create calendars that benefit the organizations. And if you capture an image of your hound during a particular season, people love that for calendars. So creating seasonal imagery is great. So for me, this is what represented spring, summer. You got those full-grown flowers. You got the dog and the kiddie pool. Fall, fall with all the bright colors, the costumes. It's great. And then, of course, in New England, we have lots of weather to work with. In the holiday season, the winter, I love the one on the right because of the little sad pumpkin in the snow. It's amazing, but it also has that little Christmas tree in the back to create some seasonal interest as well. So working with what you've got, what makes a Greyhound so much, it's unique character, you know, they are so unique. I don't even have the words for it, but I will have the words because I'm going to show you a few examples. So obviously their speed, everyone knows things about Greyhounds and their speed, but many people, when they think of Greyhounds running, they think of all the tracks or what they see on TV or these like machines, these, you know, these Ferraris of the dog world. But I think the speed is great, but so is their goofiness and the combination that's so Greyhound to me. As is the fact that they're very good at staying still as well. This is Calvin. He is a friend of mine's Greyhound, and I captured him at, I believe it was the Spring Fling at Greyhound Options, one of the Greyhound Options events, where he just found the perfect place to like plots to lay down under the signage. And I had to capture it because not only is it so Calvin, we actually call this doing a Calvin whenever your dog just plops someplace. But it's just so representative of Greyhounds in general. Their weird nose bendiness. This was taken in my studio with the camera, with my professional camera, but Greyhound noses are so odd and so delightful, and absolutely capturing that part of Greyhound anatomy is hilarious. Their length, their stretchiness, their soulful eyes, and their supermodeling superpowers. I mean, what other dog deals with clothing so well? Let's be real. These were all antique hats that my grandmother had left me. And it was during the pandemic, and this is how I kept myself entertained at the beginning of the pandemic. So what would we be without Richard Skipworth and his illustration of Greyhounds? If you're ever looking to find an image that's so representational of a Greyhound and their oddness, use Richard Skipworth as inspiration. Here Ori is combining two of his illustrations. We have the top view and the side view. And like, how do Greyhounds do this? They have 12 million legs. And of course, their noodleness and their pointiness and their silly grins. Let's move on to lighting. So you can have the greatest subject and the best arrangement in the world, but light is what really brings an image to life. A good photographer needs to be able to guide the viewer through the image using light. And I'm going to show you how to use light to compose your photographs for maximum impact over the next couple of images. As I said before, but I'm going to keep reiterating it so you remember, the eye goes to what's lightest in an image, followed by the brightest. So please use that rule of thumb to choose how you want to light your subject and where you want the eye to go. So here I'm using on Sophie a classic window light, and the window is facing Sophie. Window light is usually awesome, super user friendly. Anyone can use it. Just stick your hound in front of a window and magic will happen. It's diffuse, it's soft, it's beautiful. And as I said before, the window is parallel to Sophie's face and the side of the couch. So you're getting an overall really, really good lit face there. And using window light can look very similar to using professional studio light, sometimes even better, and anyone can use window light. I'm going to show several images of window light and how it looks different if you're photographing facing the window, your subject facing the window, or your subject, you know what, I'll use the photo show to show this to you. So here we have the window facing Sophie, and here we have the window on the right side of Sophie. So it's still a really interesting image, right? It's more contrasty. It's more mysterious. It can be beautiful and dramatic. You just need to be a little bit careful to make sure that there's enough detail in the shadow. Here we have window light that's left to the camera, which is facing in front of Ori's face, and I'm perpendicular taking that image. Here we have window that is to camera right, and it's a little bit overhead over the subjects. You'll see here that using light, and whether it's window light or any other kind of light, that because of the surface, it's going to reflect differently. So every single person, every single dog reflects light a little bit differently. You're going to see that light is a little bit more reflective on my daughter's face. It's making it a little bit brighter, both because of her skin tone and also because she's closer to the window. So the proximity makes a difference as well. But you can see here, we still have the darker Ori, his eyes are still lit up. You can still see that beautiful pinprick of catchlight reflection in his eyes. So he's still being lit well enough by this window light. So the next most user-friendly light, I would say, to window light is diffuse cloudy weather. Most people will think, oh, let's go find a beautiful sunny day. You actually have to be much more careful on sunny days than you do on cloudy days, because the clouds act like a giant softbox, a giant diffuse softening device. When you photograph on a cloudy day, even if the weather isn't great, you're still going to show a lot of detail. You can see all the little hairs on Ori's muzzle, the great catchlight in his eyes, and it really helps colors pop. So they'll be very, very vivid. And I'll tell you, this was taken on, I think it was sort of a miserable February day, but the light on him was so beautiful. You can still get a great portrait, even if it's not a particularly beautiful day. So here we are photographing outdoors in the little bit brighter light. So here's a couple tips to take advantage of outdoor sunnier light. First of all, try and keep the sun to your back, you, the photographer's back, when you photograph, so it's facing your hound. This is particularly important with hounds that are darker color. You're definitely going to want to light that face. As I said before, like if you can have that diffuse cloudy day, that's ideal. But if you do have that brighter light, just make sure it's at your back, because otherwise you're going to end up taking a silhouette of your dog rather than showing the detail in their face. I'd also really recommend avoiding high noon, which can create really harsh shadows, really harsh light. So if you are going to photograph outdoors, really beautiful light happens in the mornings, and absolutely gorgeous light happens around sunset, which we call the golden hour. So just notice when sunset's going to be on any given day and get out about an hour beforehand. You're going to create beautiful, warm golden light. So what if you're indoors and it's at nighttime? Don't hesitate to use your basic lamp. It can create a great shot. Here, I think I was using a basic halogen reading lamp. I was reading in my den. Ori came up to me wanting a walk. His ears were pricked up. It was beautiful. I just faced the light towards him at my back, took the shot. And this image, taken just a basic reading lamp, highlights his face and his ears and his eyes really beautifully. Okay, so this image was definitely taken in my studio using my professional camera, but I'm still using window light. It's actually lighting up the shadow in his face on the left-hand side. There was a window facing him on the left side, which meant that his whole left side wasn't completely in shadow. On his right side, I was using a studio light. You can see it's a little bit brighter, and I'm using that light to both highlight his face and highlight the wings as well. but also I'm choosing what you see and what you don't see by where I'm placing the light and where I'm positioning the dog. So I'm very intentionally keeping things in shadow that I don't want you as the viewer to see. I don't want you to see how the wings attach to his back. It's a little kludgy. It looks, amateurish. So I'm really using the light as how I want to show you what to see in the image. And this was my inspiration for that Halloween costume, that meme. He does look a bit like a fruit bat, don't you think? Okay. So here, light can come from very unexpected places. The light in this image was actually reflected light on a wooden floor. So the light was coming in through one window, but it was so bright and so vivid, it reflected off the floor, which then reflected off his face. And so look for those unexpected sources of light, whether you're on a walk in the winter and you see lots and lots of holiday lights, or you see a splotch of light somewhere, and just bring your hound up a little bit close and see how it looks, reflected against their face. And this was, remember I was talking to you about the golden hour. So this took place about an hour before sunset. We had that bright golden light bouncing off a warm floor onto his face. And I believe it created almost a Renaissance painting effect. So light really, really adds so much to an image. So let's move on to our last part, which is how to photograph relationships, whether it's between you and your dog and other family members, or your dog and other pets. What I would say is your goal in this is really focused on capturing a real moment with your hound. It doesn't need to be, a huge moment. It doesn't need to be big smiley moment, but a real moment, something that's representative of you and your relationship with your Greyhound. Definitely capture those moments that really resonate with you, that you would think back on them and be like, oh, that was such a special moment. I loved it when my dog did this. And here I love, and Ori especially loves, getting toweled off after a wet walk. So after he doesn't love the rain, but when he comes in, he gets the rub down and he just loves it. He makes happy noises. He's so happy. And so this image, I took advantage of the towel and the effect it has sort of framing his face. And then I snuggled up close to him. If you have a snuggly hound, please take advantage of that. If not, just get up close as much as you can and capture what's unique about both of you. So you don't actually need to be in a picture to show a relationship between the two of you. Here is a moment where Ori is taking me for a walk. And when I have taken Ori for a really big walk, he shows his appreciation at the end of the walk, just before we get home, by grabbing the leash. And then I say, do you want to take me for a walk? And he grabs on and he takes me for a walk for the rest of the time, as his way of saying, thank you for taking me on an extra long walk today. So I captured that moment, and I captured it with a little bit of that motion blur to show the fact that we were moving together. This moment is helpful in illustrating that creating the shape of two subjects pointing towards each other can be really helpful. I have that arm wrapped around him. I'm using proximity. I'm using the matching smiles. And in this image, I actually had somebody else take this image, but you can also do this with selfies as well. Don't hesitate to use a remote control. There's lots of different options. I'm going to move a little bit more quickly now. So just try and capture those moments that seem very you. Forget that you're being photographed, just really be in the moment. Cuddle up, look at your dog, ask them a question, ruffle their fur. Just have a real moment. Use, here we're photographing family members. I really suggest mirroring body language to show that relationship. Use color to unify. Use humor. And use action. And of course, use goofiness if that's the relationship that in this case, my teen and my hound have together. And that also goes for the whole family as well. When photographing pets together, again, just try and represent that relationship. These two are very brotherly in their dynamic. They tease each other. But though I'll tell you, as you can see in this image, the cat can definitely be the dominant personality. We joke that this was like sort of the mobster in his muscle image. Show their inquisitive natures, and also shooting from below to show that height difference. Bring in that leading line. Shooting from above using camera angle as we talked before. And then you have to show their personality. And don't forget to capture those sweet moments whenever you can in between their troublemaking. So that wraps up my presentation today. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to shoot me any questions. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Sharona. That's, I can't even believe how amazing those pictures are. It was just so much fun to watch. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was just really, you have to make a book with your pictures. They're just all amazing. And I can't believe that most were done with just an iPhone.
Just an iPhone.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. So we actually have just concluded the learning portion of our event. So we're going to invite people who would like to stay for the greet portion to stay right here. And you can open up your microphone and turn on your video. I'm sure some people probably have to leave just due to other commitments. So before people start taking off, just want to thank you for joining us and being part of the Learn and Greet today. Special thanks to Sharona. This was just really a lot of fun and amazing. If anybody has, as a result of this, ends up taking some amazing pictures, please be sure to share them with us on our Facebook page.